So is there a thaw on the cards between Modi and Trump? I want to go across to Fareed Zakaria, host of GPS on CNN. Thanks very much, Fareed, for speaking with us. So at the recent SEO summit in Tianjin, you had these pictures of Prime Minister Modi, President Xi Jinping of China, President Vladimir Putin of Russia, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. Of course, those pictures got a lot of circulation in the American media. Do you think it was because of the Trump tariffs and the oil tariffs, the pushback, and sort of the deterioration of ties between India and America that sort of forced the Indian Prime Minister to go to China for the first time in 7 years and sort of break bread, if you will, with Xi Jinping?
I think that there's no question that the United States has committed a strategic blunder. These tariffs are, in any case, a bad idea from an economic point of view, but they're particularly bad strategically. The idea of having India have the highest tariffs in the world, and by the way, also Brazil. These are key pivotal states that the United States and the Western world has been cultivating for the last 3 decades. Brazil as an anchor in Latin America, India, of course, as an anchor in Asia, South Africa as an anchor in Africa, and all three have been subjected to this strange combination of toxic rhetoric, high tariffs, and kinds of ideological demands. So I think the whole thing has been badly misplayed. It's important not to exaggerate the shift in Indian policy. Prime Minister Modi did go to China for the first time in 6 or 7 years. He attended this summit, but he did not attend the military parade.
Yeah.
India is still negotiating with the United States as it should. And look, whoever's fault it is and whatever American errors, India needs this deal. And so I think that the imperative on the Indian side is to try to figure out how can it make this happen? Because to put it very bluntly, India needs the deal more than the United States does.
So India needs the deal more than the US does. But having said that, Fareed, there was a certain strategic logic over the last 2.5 decades as to why India and America became close strategic partners. And that is that if there is any country in the world that can challenge America over the next many decades, it has to be China. And if you needed a counterweight to China here in Asia, it has to be India. What Trump has done with his tariffs and all these aggressive rhetoric that we're seeing from the White House, he's completely upended that strategic logic. He's turned it on its head. Why do you think he's done that? Why do you think he's pushing India away from the America corner, as it were, to the China and Russia corner?
I think sadly, we are not right now going through a very strategic period in American foreign policy. I don't think there is a particular strategic rationale to what Donald Trump has done. It seems as very often nowadays in Washington that the new American policy is a product of a combination of personal slights, annoyances, ideological preferences of one man. And so from the best I can tell, in US-India negotiations about the tariffs had been going quite well until the Indo-Pak clash took place. And at that point, Trump decided he wanted to claim credit for having ended it, which is all part of his obsession with winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And the Pakistanis were happy to indulge him and nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And the Indians were understandably unwilling to essentially, pretend that he was the key broker here. And that seems to have annoyed the hell out of him. The Pakistanis played this well, and they were able to flatter him even more. Perhaps there's something going on the crypto front with his family.
Yeah.
But it does seem as though those are the kind of issues that have shifted Donald Trump's policy towards India, not any dramatic rethinking of American strategy. Trump still says that the key issue for the United States is how to deal with a rising China. He still talks about the importance of assembling a coalition of countries against it. It's just, so it's a mixture of emotionalism, narcissism, incompetence. Frankly, there's no way to make much sense of it. But as I say, the Indians have to take the world as it is, and India still needs good trading relations with the United States.
The real sort of bolt from the blue, at least is the way India sees it, was the secondary tariffs, the oil tariffs for importing Russian oil. And India feels that, look, it's the only country that's been slapped with these tariffs. No other country. In fact, China imports more Russian oil than India does, and yet China does not face any of these secondary tariffs. So is there a feeling in the Trump administration that, certainly in the strategic community, there's been a lot of pushback against these secondary tariffs, but is there a way in which Trump can sort of walk back on these secondary tariffs? Because that seems to be the real pain point, even more than the first set of tariffs, which are the reciprocal tariffs.
I think Trump can walk back on almost anything. I mean, that's part of the flexibility of his ideology. He doesn't really believe in anything, and therefore it's easier for him to move back on some of these things than I think any American president. The tariffs on the secondary tariffs, secondary sanctions, do seem just part of a negotiating strategy of raising the cost for India, because it's an odd way to get at Russia, to punish India more than you're punishing Russia.
Yeah.
Russia is itself exempt from all tariffs. Russia has been showered with praise by Donald Trump. He keeps talking about what a great relationship he has with Putin. He lovingly displayed a photograph of him and Putin. I think in Trump's mind, and this is a very important, kind of misunderstanding that Donald Trump has about the world today. In Trump's mind, the U.S. and the Russian leaders meeting reminds him of, Nixon meeting Brezhnev, Reagan meeting Gorbachev. There's a sense in which he still thinks the world is being run by summits between the American president and the Russian leader. But that world has gone away. Russia is a small country in many senses. The economy is the size of the Netherlands or Italy. Yes, it has a big army and it has a veto in the Security Council, but it's a very dysfunctional country. So I think it's in some ways a strange overestimation of Russia, but you see this in Trump, right? With the Russians or the Chinese, whom he regards as strong, he's very careful and cautious. He likes to bully countries with whom he has leverage. And he thinks with India, he has leverage. India needs the American market more than America needs the Indian market.
So just on the war itself, what happens to the Russia-Ukraine war itself? Because strangely, what seems to have happened since the Alaska summit about 3 weeks ago is that the fighting has only intensified from the Russian side. They're now targeting Ukrainian civilian buildings, apartment complexes, government buildings. It's become much more aggressive in the last 3 weeks since the Alaska summit. And India, willy-nilly, has been sort of dragged into this as a stakeholder in this war. India needs peace between Russia and Ukraine because the secondary tariffs will continue until there is a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. So what do you reckon will happen in the war itself on the ground? And what do you make of this further aggressive tactics we've seen from Russia since the summit?
Well, as you point out, the Russians have been escalating. So far, Trump's strategy towards ending the war in Ukraine has really failed on every front. His basic strategy, let's be honest, was to coddle the Russians and to squeeze the Ukrainians. And I think he thought that by squeezing the Ukrainians to make all kinds of concessions and announcing those concessions, Ukraine would not be a member of NATO. The United States would not send any troops to protect Ukraine as a deterrence force after the war. Russia could keep all the territory it had conquered. All these concessions Trump made unilaterally, preemptively, before the negotiations even began, in the hope that this would lure Putin to do a deal which would be a favorable deal on his terms. Well, he managed to bully the Ukrainians, but the Russians still aren't willing to come to the table in any serious way. The Russians still aren't willing to end the war because Putin wants to totally dominate Ukraine. And I think Donald Trump needs to understand that the pressure he needs to put on Russia is not this bizarre indirect pressure of getting the Indians to stop buying Russian oil, which other people would buy if India didn't buy. It is to put military pressure on Russia, to give Ukraine the arms, the information, the satellite information it needs to mount an even more vigorous defense of its territory. And when the Russians feel the pressure on the battlefield,
Okay.
that is when they will most likely come to the negotiating table. The indirect pressure of doing it through this very strange way of trying to get the Indians to buy less Russian oil is not going to make much of a difference. The Chinese will buy it, the Indonesians will buy it. It'll be bought on the black market. Nobody, 3.5 million barrels of oil are not going to disappear on world markets.
So in terms of where things stand between India and the United States right now, specifically between the two leaders, Donald Trump and Prime Minister Modi, we saw a bit of a softening of stance last week where Trump was asked about it by a reporter in the White House, and he said, I have great ties with Modi. I wouldn't be worried about the Indo-US relationship. Modi sort of reciprocated that on social media, saying he shares and endorses President Trump's positive view of Indo-US ties. Do you see just in the last few days a sort of a thaw appearing on the cards between Trump and Modi?
I think it can be fixed, and I think you're right, Zaka, in noticing that those statements by Trump, which clearly were a softening of the Trump position. I think that this is his game. He pushes hard. I mean, it's the kind of continuous drama of the Trump presidency. You have crazy demands, which then get softened. The tariffs initially are announced at crazy numbers, and then they come down. What India has to decide is, can it play this game? It's clear what the game is. You come to Washington, you flatter Trump, you make a series of commitments, wild numbers, which are completely nonsensical and never going to be followed through on. But Trump doesn't care because he's running a reality television show, not the presidency of the United States. And what he wants to hear is a big Oval Office announcement where he can say the Indians are buying $100 billion of our defense equipment. They're going to invest $100 billion in the United States. No one will follow those. No one will track that. Almost all those announcements that have been made by Masayoshi Son in Japan, by the British, by the Saudis, none of them have come through in anything like the numbers that were announced. But Trump wants a big Oval Office moment where he's praised, where there are promises made. And India is somewhat reluctant. I think India is somewhat more old-fashioned in the way it approaches foreign policy. And so the question is, can India play along? Can India do the kind of put forward the spectacle that Donald Trump wants? And if it can, I think that there's probably a deal to be had, because Trump just wants to be able to say, I forced a great deal, and I'm the greatest deal maker in the world. And everyone, quietly applauds while knowing in their heads, maybe this is not all what it appears to be.
All right, Fareed Zakaria, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Fareed Zakaria, host of GPS on CNN, joining us here on Tacks.